It's the 120 podcast, and now batting for the Chicago Cubs, Anthony Rizzo.
Wow.
And I am not Andrew Belleson, despite the fact that I wish I was. But that's what this episode's about, Ben. We have Andrew Belleson on the podcast today. We recorded this interview about 2 weeks ago. So to preface this, before we kind of get into it, was recorded I think over 2 weeks ago. I think 3 weeks at this point.
Yeah,
I don't
it's been a
remember.
while.
It was a while ago. We thank Andrew for doing this. We turned it around really fast. I reached out to him. He got back to me right away, and we did it that week. And we sat on it for a couple weeks because we thought we would have this schedule of programming, which we have. I appreciate everyone listening to our Bateman and Carrico interviews. We have another one coming out next week. But obviously, as we record this yesterday, you might have heard our emergency podcast. A lot has changed.
Yeah.
The news, if you've been living under a rock, Craig Counsell has become the manager of your Chicago Cubs, and David Ross was blindsided out of his job. It's cruel, but at the end of the day, it's what the team had to do. And we'll talk a lot about that after the Belleson interview. So stick around after the Belleson interview. We're going to talk all about that. That said, we did cut a couple minutes of our Belleson interview, a good minute or two. We briefly touch on Ross, as you'll hear in the audio. In the interview we did 2 weeks ago, we went into a longer tangent about if Ross is the right guy for this team. Feels a bit insensitive now, considering Belleson is a huge fan of him. And as I always was, and as Ben was, and I wish nothing but the best for Rossi, but we'll let you hear the rest of our awesome interview.
Then one more thing before we get into the interview as well, a new Crosstown dropping on Friday. We just recorded the first semifinal match between the person you're looking at on the screen, Mikey Fernelli and Dom Amidio. It was a fun match, and I've appreciated all the support I've gotten from it thus far. And we're just going to continue doing this tournament, and I appreciate you all for tuning in.
The voice of Wrigley Field for 10 years in both Ben and I's childhood, Andrew Belleson, coming up on 120. Welcome into the 120 podcast. Mikey Fernelli, Ben Hootie, coming at you for another episode with Andrew Belleson, formerly of the Chicago Cubs and the Outside the Box podcast now here. Andrew Belleson, thank you for joining us for this episode.
Oh, it's my pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
So if you don't know, I don't know how you wouldn't know. You might recognize his voice now that he said hi, but he was the voice of Wrigley Field for a decade, from 2011 and on. And it was an awesome time. I mean, I'm 21 years old. Ben is 20. And I would say, Ben, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but like you were like one of the voices of my childhood. I don't mean to completely just flatter you with that, but like going to Wrigley Field as a kid, even talking to you now before we started recording, it's like, holy cow, like that's just like the voice I remember from Wrigley Field.
Oh, Mike, that's so nice. Thank you. You're not flattering me at all. You're making me feel old, if anything. But no, I'm just kidding. That's really nice to hear it. I mean that. I had the voices when I grew up. With Wayne Mesmer and Paul Friedman doing PA. So I totally get what you mean, and to be grouped in that class to me means the world. So really, thank you. That's really cool.
I know it was a long time ago, but what was the process like of getting hired by the Cubs? You grew up a Cubs fan, correct?
I did. Yeah. Great question, Ben. And you know what? It was crazy. There was about 3,000 people that had applied. So I didn't know that. And even without knowing that, I didn't think there was much of a chance that I was going to get hired, but it was a public process. So I did the online script. What they did is they had every applicant read the same script. And then we had to send a video audition to them with that script. And I did it. And I didn't want to do it. I figured there was really not a very good shot. But from those 3,000 applicants, then they narrowed it down to 25 of us. And that's when we started doing live auditions inside the ballpark, and everything kind of just unfolded from there. But it was a pretty crazy process because it all happened about 2.5 to 3 weeks before opening day. So it was like boom, 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 boom.
So from a college baseball career and obviously intentions to be a broadcaster, what were you kind of doing previous to Wrigley Field and the Cubs?
Yeah, I had done broadcast work like you guys in college, at the minor league level a bit, some PA as well. And yeah, play-by-play has always been my true passion. But I was so fortunate to be hired by the Cubs. I was just 23 years old when they hired me, just 24 years old when they hired me. So, I mean, I was super young. It was awesome. Public address and at that stadium, like you said, growing up a Cub fan, it was just super special to me. And the timing was right because they had some really good ball clubs for those years that I was there, which I was lucky to be along for the ride,
What did you like anyone ever tell you, like, man, you have like a really good voice for either broadcast or more specifically PA, because obviously like that's the most important part. You want to get down deep and be able to dig for like some certain names, whatever it might be, did anyone ever tell you like, man, you got a great voice for this? I think you could go far in a career like that.
You know what, Ben? Yes, I suppose so. Not for PA though, to be honest with you. I hadn't done a ton of PA work before I got hired at Wrigley, which it might sound kind of strange. I had done it at the minor league level for baseball. I kind of just growing up there and knowing the vibe and the feel of Wrigley, like I wasn't super over the top when I did PA. I didn't think I wasn't a cheerleader or anything like that. And I think it just kind of fit the realm there and kind of fit the feel at Wrigley. But no, that was really, I was a very novice in the PA world at the time that I got hired, but I was very fortunate to still land the position.
And it's interesting you point out that you just kind of attributed to the vibe of Wrigley Field, because I completely agree with that. There is a certain energy when you walk in there, you hear the natural sounds. I literally saw on YouTube yesterday doing a little bit of prep that somebody just took their phone out in May of 2018 and recorded like an hour of pregame, including your voice and like the natural sounds and the vendors and shit. And like, it's just so funny hearing like all of that together. But then I was like, wow, this is so cool. Like kind of putting yourself in that headspace, and you definitely attributed to that vibe. Of getting into the players though, when you would, when a new player would come up for the Cubs, because as you said, it was some exciting years, would you practice like, how am I going to say this guy's name? How am I going to fit it into my style? Or was it kind of just like whatever sounds comfortable?
Mikey, that's a great question. Yes to all, but not really practice. Kind of just see what comes out. I would do it maybe once or twice before we did it live, just to make sure I didn't sound like a complete moron, just in case. But I would just play with it very briefly and just kind of keep it in my style. I would think about it, yes, but not overthink it too much. Again, I felt pretty even keel. And the style I had doing PA there just kind of fit. So knowing that, I was able to kind of keep everything pretty consistent with that, in terms of the names.
Me and Mikey were talking about it when we talked to you about coming on for an interview. But one of our favorite things when you were the public address announcer at Wrigley Field was the way that you would say the names of the away team. You'd still like have your charm and your voice in it, but you'd sound so disappointed when some people would come up to the plate. Like I love when Yadier Molina would come up to the plate and just be like, Yadier Molina, and everyone would boo. And I like, why did you kind of like want to be so like sad and somber whenever the away players came to the plate?
You know what, Ben, it's a good question. I just felt like they're on the road and you give them the proper introduction, but nothing more. It's funny you said that. I had the opportunity to sit down with Wade Boggs once at Wrigley, which was a super thrill for me. I mean, he was one of my favorites as a kid, obviously Hall of Fame third baseman. And he came to interview me. It was like a series about fun jobs around the ballpark. And I always kidded with him. I said, this should be the other way around. Like nobody wants to hear from me. I should be interviewing you, first of all. But he said, okay, well, announce me. And I did him, relatively somber, third baseman, Wade Boggs. And he looked at me like, dude, what'd you give me that for? And I said, well, you're not on the Cubs, so that's how it goes. And he laughed. But it just, I don't know. It's just kind of how it came to be.
Well, that was the voice right there. I actually completely heard that. Obviously, you just did it, but I always loved the way, and I would always see on social media, people would love the way you would do like Javi or Anthony Rizzo. There was just a certain way it would be like Baez or like Anthony Rizzo, like something like that. And it was, I don't know why, but it was just something in the way that you did it constantly every time. People loved it. And I'm sure you've heard all that feedback, but it was, myself included, I still impersonate that to this day.
That was good, Mikey. Thank you. No, I appreciate that. And, I sticking with the theme of Wrigley in the field, I love the organ music. The organ music at the ballpark's how it's supposed to be. And like you were saying, taping that pregame tape that you heard, when I walk into the ballpark and hear Gary Pressey on the organ, like to me, I knew like that took me back to my childhood. Like I'm at Wrigley. And so I would just feed off that and just kind of stick with how it should be. I felt at Wrigley with those sounds, and I was just very fortunate to fit into a little 10-year window of that history with that ballpark. It's very special.
My personal favorite was the way you said Chris Bryant. Chris Bryant. That was just the best. But what was it like for you to work with the legend Gary Pressey? I mean, I'm assuming that the PA announcer and organist, it's kind of like a tag team, the way that you guys go back and forth with each other. So what was it like to work with a true legend like Gary Pressey?
Oh man, he's the best there ever was in terms of sports organists. Again, I was so young when I got hired. He kind of took me under his wing. We sat together. He was right behind me in the PA booth. Kind of taught me how to handle myself in a major league press box at 23 years old, which is something, not that I was, um, not qualified for the position, but he took me under his wing and guided me. And what people don't know about Gary, which is so cool, is the guy is a wealth of sports knowledge. It's insane what's in his head. I swear to God, he's never forgotten a statistic in his entire life, and it will blow you away. So not only is he incredibly talented musically, I idolized him growing up playing the organ at Wrigley. So to get to do player announcements over his organ playing and with his organ playing was just unbelievable to me. But we developed such a great friendship. I mean, we sat in a 200 square foot booth, for almost 1,000 games together. So we got to know each other very well. He's a very good friend and just a super special person.
So I saw you got to sing the stretch, which is pretty cool at one point in your time at Wrigley. And
yeah,
go for it.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask, we talk all about you, but in your time in that 200 square foot booth, as you mentioned, with Gary and with, whoever, and then the guest for the stretch, who were just like some of the characters that you just like got to interact with in the time up there in the booth? Because there's been some really funny stretches over the years, and I'm sure over those 10 years, it was no exception.
Yeah, it's an awesome question. It's one of my favorite parts is all those people would come in and kind of do a little rehearsal in the fifth or sixth inning with Gary just to make sure that they didn't get caught with their pants down, so to speak, because it's super intimidating. Like, it's funny because you see these A-list Hollywood celebrities come in and TV personalities and musicians, and they are just beside themselves nervous to sing Take Me Out to the Ballgame, which I always thought was funny. You make A-list movies and you're scared to sing the stretch. But I always loved when old players came up, old Cubs, Ernie before he passed, and Billy and Fergie and any, the list goes on. I'm a baseball guy, so being able to pick their brain was so cool. During the World Series, Vince Vaughn sang one of the home games at Wrigley. He hung out in the booth for 4 or 5 innings. I'm a huge Vince Vaughn fan, and he's a diehard Cubs fan and a super, super intelligent baseball guy. So chatting with him was awesome. Honestly, simple answer. I was a left-handed first baseman growing up in the 90s in Chicago. Mark Grace was my idol, my favorite player of all time. And I met him when he came in. And I don't get starstruck, guys. I'll be honest with you. I almost hit the ground when he walked in. I'm like, oh my God, that's Mark Grace, But it was so many cool people that were just all so gracious and so happy to be at Wrigley to do the stretch. It was really, really neat.
Feels like so many years ago now, but obviously you came in 2011. That's when Theo was in the middle of the rebuild and, shipping guys off, but bringing the young guys in. What was the feeling around like upstairs in the booth with you guys when, the youth movement kind of came in 2015, and it truly felt like from the start of 2016 that there was something special there. And obviously it ended the way I think everyone kind of predicted it to be.
Yeah, you kind of knew that things were nudging the right way. Right after, 11 was whatever, holdover, Quaddy, 12, 13 down years with Swain. And then things start to go. You knew it was coming, I guess. But for me, that 2015 run when they made the playoffs, knocked the Cardinals out, like that was one of my favorite series of all time, even World Series included. At that point, you knew like, well, this is legit now. And now there's expectation. And then lo and behold, in 2016, they lived up to it. And you could feel it coming, but you guys know there's no guarantee in sports, regardless of how good you are on paper. And they still were able to do it. So that was unreal. Now, as a hard Chicago sports fan, the fact that they didn't make it back again, it still pees you off, doesn't it? But I mean, we're greedy after all that time. We got one, so we should be happy.
I love the honesty there. You talk about, being a big Chicago sports fan and stuff like that. Your biggest series, you said, was that series kind of like the coming out party for Kyle Schwarber when he put that ball on top of the Jumbotron in right field. Are you keeping up with modern baseball to this day? Because last night he had 2 more for the Phillies, and I think a lot of things that right now in talk are, should we have let him walk for the low price it was? Personally, I'm getting madder and madder every time. I'm excited for him, but yeah, that one hurts.
It's so crazy you said that. I was talking to my wife last night. We were flipping back and forth between the Phillies game and some other stuff we were watching. And I said, God, I can't. I'm on the Phillies train, man. I love Schwarber. I love Castellanos. They're fun to watch. Yeah, Schwarber is unbelievable. I mean, the game's different now, I guess. I know. What did he hit? $197 this year, but he hit, 4 million home runs, still takes his walks, right? So it's a great combo. But yeah, I'm with you. He's drawn me back to baseball this postseason big time. Just rooting for the Phillies and him. That's a tough question. I mean, about letting him walk. I'm with you. I was always a huge Schwarber guy. I loved his work ethic. I loved his attitude. I loved his approach. You can see him. I mean, he's developed so well over the last couple of years into the role that he plays now, and he's legit. But yeah, I'm kind of closet rooting for the Phillies because I've always been a Schwarber guy.
Same here.
Mikey, we recorded an episode yesterday, and me and Mikey went on a whole Phillies tangent for the second half of the episode, just because, I mean, they're a lot of fun, and it's fun to root for Schwarber and Castellanos as well, because his time was super fun with the Cubs too.
Yeah, he had a 50-game stretch when he was on the north side. He was out of his mind. He couldn't. Nobody got him out.
That's a fair question. Who was like your favorite like random Cub during your time? You're like, I get to say this guy's name for 50 games at the very least. I mean, Nick Castellanos is a great answer, but was there anyone else you're just like, wow, this is random but kind of fun?
This is super random. Remember when Carlos Gonzalez was on the Cubs for about
20
days or whatever? Yeah, that was I for some reason I thought that was going to be the great resurrection. He was going to hit 400, hit 15 home runs coming down the stretch, but didn't happen. But no, that Castellanos move I loved. I was always a big fan of his in Detroit. Doubles machine, obviously. So watching him for 50, that's probably tops on my list there of, we'll say, random Cubs during my era.
That's pretty funny.
What are you keeping up with all the other Chicago sports as well? All the Bears stuff right now. What are your thoughts on that? Just coming from a Chicago fan, just your feelings and thoughts towards the organization as a whole right now.
We're diehard Bears fans in our house. I mean, we were listening to the game in Florida last weekend because we didn't have it on TV. So listen to Jeff Joniak and Tom Thayer, and they're awesome. And Bears, not so much, man. It stings. You guys know, I'm sure, right? You're fans. It's not what we expected to this point. And now Fields is hurt with the thumb, so that's bad news. Maybe it's the eternal optimist in me when it comes to Bears football, but I really thought this would kind of be somewhat of a corner turning year and building on some of the work they did this offseason, and has not come to fruition. So yeah, it's after week 6 when you're basically done already. That sucks.
All right, let's talk your new show. I listened into your Herm Edwards episode. I know you said you have a Gary Pressey episode kind of in the hopper here for the next little bit. What's that about? What is kind of your elevator pitch for Outside the Box and what you're trying to do with it?
It's been fun. It's just a little project I wanted to do. And, if nobody listened, I'm enjoying doing it. So that's cool for me. But yeah, I wanted to go outside the box with some of the names that sports people and otherwise would recognize, but maybe talk about some things that, people don't know them for. So Herm, such a great guy, had the opportunity to talk football and Jets and ask him about our Bears, but he's a dad and a mentor and a life coach, essentially, is kind of what I labeled him as outside of football. And a lot of people don't know that. A new episode coming out later today as well with Jacob Turner, who was a former first-round Major League Baseball pick, played 11 years professionally, but didn't have the numbers in the bigs that he had wanted to have, and turn all of that experience and knowledge into a great career in the wealth management industry. But just kind of stuff like that, sitting down and talking with names that a lot of people might recognize and say, oh, that's a familiar person. I didn't know they did that, and kind of just taking it one step further. So it's been a lot of fun.
The cool concept. I think that's really interesting because you don't really get that about some people. Like even hearing from you that you're a huge Chicago sports fan for all the other stuff and you're still listening to the Bears games. Like I wouldn't have known that, which is probably something that you want to bring out for other people in your show. And with the dogs, you did some play-by-play I saw, and you're continuing to do so. What's that dream that's still kind of being chased?
Yeah, going back and trying to turn the clock back 15 years and get a play-by-play career going again. Again, that's, it's always what I wanted to do is play-by-play, and I loved it. I used to sit in the living room as a kid and listen to the Cubs on GN and turn down Harry Carey and Steve Stone and announce the game over them, Yeah, spending the last year with the Dogs was great. They're a phenomenal organization, great ballpark in Rosemont, great staff and crew there. So getting on the air and working with them was such a treat. It's just so nice to be in the booth, and they had a hell of a good season too. I mean, made it all the way to the championship series. So being able to have the opportunity to be around baseball and do play-by-play still is just such a treat.
Was it weird for you after doing public address for so many years in a row, popping back in the play-by-play game, like trying to get back in the swing of things, or did it just come easy to you yet again?
You know what, Ben? I had to knock the rust off for sure, and that's a daily process, right? You try to get better every day in terms of your craft, depending on what you might be calling. What's funny though is I did PA once this year in Rosemont for the Dogs as a fill-in, and I hadn't done PA since I left Wrigley, so that was harder, I think, than being in the booth next door.
To get your voice back to that like deep level and be able to have that, like, I get exactly what you're saying. Was there people that recognized you doing it in the Chicago Dogs game that were like, hey, wait a second, like, it, you know what I mean?
There were, surprisingly. I was surprised, and that was a very nice compliment. But there were some people that recognized. They said, "Boy, this guy's still around." There was a few people, yeah.
Have you met Jeremiah, the new Cubs PA guy? Have you talked to him at all or anything? Or
I have. I met Jeremiah when he was probably 13 or 14 years old, growing up a Cubs fan, and another guy that always wanted to be an announcer. Great guy, has a really good approach that I think fits the Wrigley sound very well, as well. So yes, I do know Jeremiah. He's a very good dude.
I think you guys have a very similar sound, and obviously Gary has since retired and they've moved on there too. So, but I think that the both guys have done a really solid job of keeping that vibe. I'm biased because, like I talked about in the beginning, I'm used to your sound, but I think it's very similar, and the vibe still remains pretty positive.
Well, thank you, Mikey, but I couldn't agree with you more. I think they did a phenomenal job in finding Gary's replacement and Jeremiah as well in the PA. Mikey, he does really, really good work.
Before we let you go, is there anyone you wanted to give a quick shout out to or mention one more before we wrap this up?
Well, I'll ask you guys. I'm curious because I like to get to know you guys as well. What do you think for Cubs 2024? Should we be very optimistic, or is there going to be a little negative carryover from the way September rolled out this year?
Benjamin?
Man, I think this is a huge off season. This is probably one of the biggest off seasons in a long time because they have the money to spend, and I think they got to use it. Well, and they also have an arsenal of prospects as well. Obviously, you don't want to get rid of the ones that you've kind of developed and are top, but I think this is the deepest that the farm system's been since probably 2014. So I think you got to put that to use and have the ability to, get a big bat in the middle of that lineup, whether it's Cody Bellinger that you're spending on or potentially trading for with Soto and Pete Alonso. And then I think you got to get another arm as well. And I think that can lead to successful bearings in 2024. And I hope that's the case.
Yeah, I'm with you. You painted a really good picture. I hope it comes to fruition because this is where Jed and company get, push the right buttons. They've done a good job so far. So I'm with you. One right there, almost to the top.
Yep.
It'll be fun to see how it shakes out.
And you might have a closer perspective that's having worked for a professional baseball team like the Cubs for the 10 years you did. But I'm starting to see from Cody that classic, high profile agent, high profile player, social media game, because that's just the world we live in now, where Bryce Harper did it, Chris Bryant did it, Wilson Contreras did it. They say stuff on their social media like it was a pleasure to play at Wrigley Field or stuff like this, or I enjoyed my time. And they're not completely shutting the door on it, but they're also saying, hey, open market, open business. That said, I don't think Cody would deny coming back to the Cubs if the price is right. And I think the Cubs should completely give him everything he wants. Like this year on Twitter, I kept posting a blank check with Cody Bellinger's name on it was one of my jokes, because I think the time is now to go spend. We keep talking about, should we have paid Kyle Schwarber? Should we have gone harder for Bryce Harper? Should we consider re-signing Chris Bryant? Don't let that become an issue again. Keep Cody around.
Yeah, it's a super fair point you bring up. I don't disagree with you at all. And a lot of guys get on players like that. I feel like in the media and fans, I've never faulted any professional athlete, regardless of sport, for going after as much money as they can because their window to succeed is about this big compared to your career or my career, where we could possibly do what we do for 50 or 60 years. You can't do that in the bigs. And sure, there's other income streams and revenue opportunities just because you were a big league player, say, but I don't blame Cody for finding the right situation for his family and financially, wherever that may be. But I will say, I'm with you. The numbers he put up at Wrigley with the Cubs this year were phenomenal. If he was back in a Cubs uniform, regardless of the price tag, I don't think any Cub fan would have an issue with that.
No. I think that's going to be the major goal. And as Ben pointed out, just getting some new pitching would probably be the ultimate goal because, yeah, like you pointed out, Andrew, I think it's just to come up so close and so far. I think we've kind of gone through all the stages of that at this point and processed it and gotten into some interviews here in the off season. But yeah, that was hard doing this podcast for our first season, getting so high on it in like August and September. And then just gradually through our last couple episodes throughout September, just you kind of saw the decline of Ben and I, like, you know what? It was fun while it lasted.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it just shows you how much of a grind the baseball season is, right? Last 20, 25 days of the year come September, it gets tough. I was glad they did what they did. Of course, I wanted them, postseason baseball and win, but I'm such a David Ross fan. I love him as a person. I like what he does in the dugout. So to have the year they had, I think I was pumped just for his sake, the team as well. And you're right. What you guys said, especially what you talked about Ben a little while ago, is I think they're really close to being completely around the corner and having a full 162 put together next year.
Andrew, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it and look forward to having you again on sometime and listening to Outside the Box as you drop more episodes.
Mike, Ben, my pleasure. Thank you guys so much.
Good. Thank you, Andrew.
Huge thank you to Andrew Belleson. Ben, my favorite part of that interview is when he's talking about when former players would come in and just want to hear their name on the loudspeaker, and he would still do it with his visitor voice because he's like, if you're part of that Cubs family, you only get to the real excitement. And I thought that was so cool, and that's the closest we got. I don't know if you noticed in the interview, that's the closest we got to hearing him do the actual voice.
It was a great interview. I really do appreciate Andrew for coming on. We had a lot of fun with him, talking to him, even talked to him about 15 minutes after the recording ended. So a lot of fun. Appreciate you, Andrew, for coming on, and hopefully can be a potential reoccurring guest as well in the future. Yeah,
I'll ditto that. Andrew's an awesome guy. I wish him nothing but the best moving forward in his play-by-play career. He's obviously got an awesome work ethic and a voice for it, and cool to hear he was doing stuff for the Dogs last year, and I look forward to hearing more.
And make sure to tune into his podcast as well, Outside the Box.
Correct. He has one coming up with Gary Pressey, and I know he was excited talking about that when we recorded, so I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk Cubs. We weren't gonna have too different of a tale of this one. You know what we've been doing in our podcast episodes. We usually have a little tale on the end of our interviews, 5 minutes of general talk. It was about the playoffs before. Newsflash, I don't think we ever touched on this, but the Texas Rangers won the World Series. Okay, moving on. Craig Counsell is the manager of your Chicago Cubs. If you didn't listen to our 10-minute emergency podcast yesterday, we'll kind of fill you in. The minute we found out, we went live. Well, not live, but we started recording, and we literally were finding out about the contract details while recording. You heard me say wow 5 times. You heard Ben say the F-bomb twice, all within the first minute. That clip's on Instagram and TikTok. Special shout out to Ben for doing that. New details have arisen today. Nothing bad per se, but the dust has settled a bit more. The contract, 5 years, $40 million. And Ben, I'll let you take it away here for what we know now about David Ross. Let's start there.
Yeah, it's tough for him. I really do feel bad because Rossi was truly a great guy. And if you didn't see some of the news today, Jed flew out a couple of days ago, it seems. So this has been the fact that they were able to keep this under the lid for so long.
That's another thing.
Is really impressive. But Jed flew out to Florida to visit Rossi and let him know that he will not be managing the Chicago Cubs anymore. And the quote is that Rossi was blindsided, as I think all of Cubs fans and just about anyone in the organization besides maybe Jed and Tom and a couple others at the top. So once again, it's at the end of the day, it's tough to see that this happened to Rossi because he is such a great guy. And, while you could you could make an argument that he might have made some bad in-game decisions, some bad lineups. At the end of the day, they were definitely building towards something with him. But I think it's about improving on the margins and getting better at the end of the day.
The thing is, we're not used to this, right?
Right.
A few different aspects of this as Chicago sports fans. There's never really been, at least Ben and I's lifetime, a coach that needs to probably go, but could stick around. And he's part of that is because he's just such a likable dude. He's a former player. I mean, it's kind of Ditka. Like if you think back all the way back, it's a little bit Mike Ditka, but obviously Mike Ditka won a Super Bowl and as an all-time Hall of Fame player and coach. But in our lifetime, I don't really think there's ever seen something like this. And it's like if during the Nagy era, like when we first liked Nagy, like if after 2018, excuse me, when Nagy won Coach of the Year and everyone loved him and everyone was like, oh, the double doink, but really looking forward to next year. Little did we know we'd be terrible, but everyone was looking forward to next year and everyone liked Nagy. It'd be like if like Andy Reid or like Sean Payton at the time or somebody like that just like came and knocked on Hallis Hall and was like, hey, I know you have a coach, but I want to coach this team. It's hard to say no to that. And I'm not mad at the Cubs for saying yes to Craig Counsell. Excuse me. It's just, I feel terrible for Rossi in the situation. He's a former player. Fergie Jenkins himself called him a Cubs legend today on Twitter. And I think that sentiment remains. A legend in a Hall of Fame sense? No, but I mean, the obvious should say it. Our manager took one deep during Game 7 of the World Series. I mean, the lore behind this guy as a Cubs player and coach is and always will be all time.
And it was at the end of the day, just about getting better. I guarantee if Craig Counsell was coaching this team last year, they would have made the playoffs. But once again, that's not necessarily a knock on Rossi. I'm very intrigued to see what's next up for him. I know that there are a few managerial jobs open right now, as in San Diego, and I'm missing one of Houston and Milwaukee, of course. So it'll be interesting to see. I know there are some very quiet reports that Milwaukee and San Diego have had potential interest in bringing him in and getting him in for an interview, but I don't know. We'll end up seeing what happens. Obviously, when the Cubs poached him as their new coach, he was taken away from the broadcast booth, which he was pretty phenomenal color guy for his time there. So I wouldn't be shocked if he went back into the booth. If he gets a manager job, congratulations to him, because it just proves that other teams saw what the Cubs had with him for the time being. But I'd also be interested to see if maybe he does take a little bit of a side job, and maybe he takes the year off, or maybe he goes and he's a bench coach for another team. I know a lot of these these coaching staffs are being finalized and stuff like that, but there are still openings, and Stephen Vogt still got to pick his coaching staff over there up in Cleveland. So I wish the best for him. But at the end of the day, I'm still not upset about what the Cubs did.
That'd be pretty full circle if he goes and helps coach in Cleveland.
Right.
I don't remember if it was, and forgive me if you just heard this and I'm repeating it, but I don't remember if this is one of the things we cut in the Belleson interview or not, but Andrew talked about how his first reaction when David Ross became the manager of the Cubs was he was a really good broadcaster.
Yeah. I think
there had talent there.
I think that part was cut out.
So that I'll just reiterate that what Andrew said. He had mentioned that he was kind of making jokes with Ross, but also just generally saying like, yeah, he was really good at broadcasting. And I think that's easily a career he can hop back in. He was on ESPN's BRC team, I'm pretty confident, back in the day, pre-2020, pre-pandemic, as we like to say, even though those two things have nothing to do with each other. But it's David Ross, 2020 National League Central Division champion, as they said in the press release yesterday by the Cubs, had a winning record over those 4 years. I'm pretty sure it stacked up that
way. He was 20 games under.
Just 20 games under. Just like we were in June or July. No, I'm kidding. We were 10 under, and we found a way to make it fun. No, David Ross. We're not eulogizing the guy. This won't be it for him. He'll be back around. Maybe even with the Cubs someday. I doubt it when you leave like that, but the only thing I hope is that it doesn't affect David Ross, the player, as a legend. Like, I still hope they let him come back. Well, it's not they won't let him. I still hope he wants to come back and have his first pitch, his 7th inning stretch. Now that he's not an employee of the Cubs, obviously it won't be next year, but in 10 years, I hope he does what Zobrist and Fowler have done and does the stretch and does his little, ring on his hand waving to the crowd. People aren't going to have a bad taste of him as a manager. It's not like he was fired, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And I think all of Cubs Nation has really been behind him throughout this all. As much as
Yeah.
everyone agrees with the Counsell move, I think most people would agree this was truly blindsiding and no one expected it. And I guarantee you David Ross didn't expect it either because someone else took his job as he was employed. It will be interesting to see what he does though this upcoming year. I wouldn't be shocked if he takes the year off, especially considering the fact that he is still getting a paycheck from the Cubs. So
Yeah.
it's tough, but we move, as I've been saying, we up. And I did not expect the offseason to begin like this, but we are the wheels are truly turning right now.
I hope there's no bad taste in Rossi's mouth, and we'll leave it there. And I would understand if there was, but I really hope he still knows he's loved around here. Let's talk about Craig Counsell.
Yeah.
He had to handpick the Cubs. His contract expired with the Brewers, but he easily could have resigned, and the Brewers were okay, and he was okay with mutually looking for other options. There obviously was the Mets, where everyone and their mother assumed was the best target because they'd pay him the most.
And David Stearns.
Yeah, exactly. And then they're not going to sign a GM. Did you see that today? They're just not going to have a GM this offseason.
Okay.
The Mets is what they said. They said they have too much going on. Yeah, you and I both. But they're not going to sign a GM. And so everyone thought the Mets. There was talk then, oh, there's a mystery team. It's not the Padres or the Guardians or the Mets. It might be the White Sox is what Ben had texted me. It might be the Red Sox. But it turned out he wanted to go shoeless, and he went sockless with the Chicago Cubs. Had to knock on Jed's door effectively. I'm sure Jed gave him a call too, but he had to knock on his door, give him a phone call and say, hey, you're in a decent situation. You all but made the playoffs with a former player as a manager. That would be really hard to fire. Pay me.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. And I saw a quote from Jed today saying, you can't pass up on this opportunity when a manager like this just becomes available to the open market. And I think the thing that's most impressive about it all, obviously we kind of touched on this in our emergency episode yesterday, but we didn't really comprehend it at the time because everything was coming in all at once. And it was
Pandemonium.
Pandemonium. But this all came together in the last few days. The Cubs had to seek permission before November 1st to talk to Craig Counsell, and they didn't. They never put in a request to Milwaukee. So no one knew this was coming. And if you're saying November 1st, he signed November 6th with Cubs. So that's about 5 days of discussions and negotiations, whether it's what you said that Craig Counsell reached out to the Cubs or whether it's Jed reaching out to Craig Counsell, whatever it might have been, the fact that they were able to get this done and convince Craig Counsell to come to the North Side, who already has a solid foundation in place, but has one of the best farm systems in baseball, money to spend. Whatever Tom and Jed told them in their meeting, he must have really liked because there's a lot of great jobs out there.
Here's what they told him as my guess. It's time to completely change the character. You can't pull a move like that on Ross and not let this effectively change the entire, at least for this period, the next great Cubs team is going to be one that's never had this type of villainous role. You have to play like the Dodgers or Yankees now or spend like them. I mean, Counsell could have gone to either of those other two programs or any other team that has a lot of money, i.e. the Padres and a million superstars who had a vacancy, and he chose the Cubs. Why? Because it's not a team that has ever been like that. But he had, 7 or like all but one of his seasons since 2017 was a winning season. He won the division how many times? I want to say 3 or 4 in those years since 17. And they kept coming up short. The NL MVP batted like barely above 200 for 2 years in there, and they just kept coming up short.
And you mentioned that with a nimble roster. The Brewers, year after year, and we talked about this in one of our first episodes we've ever done, how the Brewers every single year love to just put out a roster of slapstick players that just, but they're either at their cliff of their career or they're just these randos that they just called up from the minor leagues. And they every single year manage to put together an 85+ win team. And that's, as much as that's probably some great coaching and the organization itself, even though I don't want to give them too much flowers, at the end of the day, I guarantee you a lot of that falls on Craig Counsell's shoulders.
So Counsell wants this sandbox where he's like, I'm obviously a good manager. You're going to pay me. Most of managers ever been paid. He doesn't want to do it. And either of those, stereotypically money spending programs or franchises, I should say. So he's going to have his opportunity. He has this blank canvas now with a team that has an infinite wallet and great fans that he's seen up close multiple times a year, every year. And I'm sure in that pitch, they were like, Craig, we're paying you double what the second highest manager is now paid. We obviously have the money to spend. Let's have some fun.
Yeah.
You're not going to have to really move your family. He's from Wisconsin, or he's from Indiana. He lives in Wisconsin. He played for the Brewers. He is apparently, for someone close to him source-wise, always wanted to play or coach for the Cubs. And he has this infinite amount now to go get a dream team, basically. I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but they have the opportunity now to build a Golden State Warriors of baseball with a great manager and completely change what the Cubs are known for.
And that's what I had when I wrote our notes before this. My number one thing that I wrote at the top, this is signaling a huge offseason. You don't just sign a manager to the biggest contract he's ever gotten if you didn't plan on doing whatever is possible. And I listened to David Kaplan's recap yesterday, which if you haven't checked it out, it's like a 3-minute and 30-second video. And he just made me want to run through a brick wall. The way that he was just able to talk and get everyone so excited over this offseason. He said that he's heard that this sent shockwaves throughout the entire Major League Baseball, whether it's the GMs, the coaches, and everyone is expecting the Cubs to be a big player on every single free agent, trade candidate, whatever it might be. They are ready to roll this offseason.
If you've ever been a free agent this offseason that wanted to play for a great coach in an awesome stadium and didn't want it to be Milwaukee, come find us at 1060 West Addison. Yeah. Promise there's a spot for you.
One thing I want to say is, because you went on a great, you brought up a ton of great points, but you were mentioning about how villainous this was. And it truly is. Mm-hmm. And I was watching.
Kind of rocks.
I turned on the radio. I turned on my Odyssey app as soon as I heard that this news broke, because I wanted to see what the 670 coverage was. It was Bernstein and Holmes at the time. And the first thing that they said when the news came through, like, they said, this is badass. Like, this is villainous. This is a baller move, but I love it. And that's exactly what the Chicago
One
Cubs
of the two,
did.
I think it was Dan Bernstein. Bernstein kept posting the New World Order, like WWE thing. Like, this is who we are now. Like, it's like we're the villains now. And I love it. I'm low-key leading into it. It doesn't have to mean a monumental shift of what the organization's all about. The beer and the hot dogs are still going to taste the same on a nice summer day in the bleachers. But the team might actually make the playoffs year in and year out for the next couple of years if they actually. I mean, I'm getting way ahead of myself, but I just think this could be huge.
That you have every right to be, and that's exactly what we're trying to say. You made the manager move. You got the big guy. You got the guy to center this whole thing off. Don't stop. Whatever free agent that you have on your list, go and target them. As long as it's financially capable and it's actually, you're not just signing players because they're names. Sign the players that you know that can make an impact to this roster next year and help you get to the playoffs, because you missed it by one game this year. Craig Counsell is that difference, and the potential free agents and players that they could bring in for this roster can make that much of a difference.
Very possible 2023 NL Manager of the Year, Craig Counsell.
Yes, he is a finalist.
Could make that difference, which is funny because if he does win, I almost hope he does, because it'll be do the Cubs congratulate him on their Twitter? Do the Brewers congratulate him on their Twitter? Does nobody? I mean, I'm sure the Cubs would, but does nobody? Does he just get a nice handshake from his brothers? Like, what? How does that work?
Mikey, I can't wait for this press conference next week. I know they're pushing it off till next week because of the GM meetings right now, which, if you're not paying attention, keep an eye on that, because you could start to see some potential rumors and stuff come up with those GM meetings going on.
I can just imagine Jed and Carter walking into the GM meetings with like the full tuxedos on, like the stepbrothers, and just
everyone turning heads. Turning heads, like those guys.
Wow.
They did that.
Yeah. They went there.
I mean, it's a badass move at the end of the day. It is. As much as, you know, it not disrespectful to Rossi, but as much as it probably hurt to see Rossi just leave like that, It is a baller move. Repeating the words of Lawrence Holmes, it's a baller move.
You know what's going to really help, Ben?
Yeah.
With 8 million a year for 5 years, signing the last year of a $71 million contract, just letting it go. Just kind of, he opted out. He's done. Marcus Stroman, he's not coming back. And that we talked about that the day before Counsell, just separately, you and I on text, and we're like, oh, that's a lot of extra money to spend. What did they know? What did those two idiots know?
What the hell, man? Who would have ever thought, right?
Yeah. No.
And as much as Stroman had his ups and downs this year, he was still a solid pitcher across his Chicago career. So I wouldn't have minded them bringing him back. Or if he would have opted in, I wouldn't have minded it at the end of the day. But now you just freed up $21 million in cap space to even further prove, go get someone better. Go get someone better. You have the money to spend. Go get it done. I can't believe that Stroman truly did it, because I don't think he's going to get $21 million a year anywhere else unless he's trying to sign that last big contract that kind of, sets him up for the rest of his career. But he's on the older side anyways, and he's a guy that, you look at the underlying numbers, and I wouldn't say the first half was luck because he was a really great pitcher, but you can't forget about the fact that he's a great ground ball pitcher, and half the time it was his middle infield, the 2 Gold Glovers and Dansby Swanson and Nico Horner making plays up the middle for him to get outs.
I just got a text, by the way, and not to go back and Counsell really fast. We'll get back to Stroman in 2 seconds. A great point, Ben. They just wrote a story. The Athletic just put out an official story, because they were the first ones to break it. So they have their official accompanying story, how the Cubs swooped in and did this. And I'm going to read that after this.
That would be exciting.
As I suggest everyone does, because that's the big one. But yeah, Marcus, I wish him nothing but the best. Again, it's a kind of like Rossi. It's good for the Cubs, but I'm no hard feelings about it. It frees up a ton of money. I mean, and this is like you said, man, I don't think he's going to get that deal elsewhere. I almost wonder, did the players know about? They couldn't have known about the coaching change early, because it would have gotten out earlier.
Yeah.
Do you think Stroman's kicking himself today?
I wouldn't necessarily say kicking himself, because he should have just opted into that $21 million deal. I don't know what it blindsided me when I saw that. I don't know if he had ill will towards management. I don't know if he had ill will towards Ross. That could be the one situation where maybe he's kicking Ross, himself.
Then he's maybe
he should have just opted in no matter what and racked up that $21 million.
He just probably wants to play elsewhere and thinks he can get paid more. I mean, before he even played a game for the Cubs, he was talking about all the other teams he wanted to play for in that interview, that infamous interview. So I think he just is a journeyman. He doesn't want to stay in one place, and he wants to make as much money as he can in his career. Hell, some random team might offer him way more for a 2-year contract.
I just find it interesting because I don't know if it's because he has been off of social media for the last couple months, ever since his injury, but every single time that Marcus Stroman has left a place, it's always ended in bad feelings. And I wouldn't necessarily say that's the case right now, but it does make you raise your eyebrow and say, I wonder if something happened behind the scenes that we don't know about that hasn't come out yet.
Speaking of people sticking around, 2 of the biggest, most influential veterans in Cubs Nation, I should say, over the most recent years, have decided to opt in and stay with the Cubs with their new management. Both Gomes, Gas Money Gomes, and Game 7 starter Kyle Hendricks. It's great to have them both back, especially Gomes. I mean, I both of them, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, for production-wise, Gomes was insane last year. So clutch, and every team needs that veteran leader who's been there before, even though they were going to bring in, hopefully, a ton more veterans this offseason. And then, of course, Kyle Hendricks. I mean, what can you say? Really was productive at the end of the year. Kind of shocked us with how he was still playing pretty well. And I think he still got a little bit left. I'm so glad to hear that that wasn't it for him.
I love both moves for the Cubs, because we'll start with Gomes first. As much as Gomes was the most clutch player on the Cubs last year, and he's definitely going to get a good chunk of the playing time going into this year, it also just, once again, you don't have to push Miguel Amaya into the fold right away. So we could start to see this, and I think they might even be 50-50. It'll be similar to what we saw in 2016 when David Ross and Miguel Montero were going away and Wilson Contreras was stealing reps from them. For Gomes, it's a similar thing. He could kind of marinate and Miguel Amaya into a big leaguer after a pretty solid year from Miguel Amaya. But you were taxed to play Yan Gomes every day because of the fact that they were in the race all the way up until the second to last day of the season. So I love that for not only Gomes because of what he brought to the Cubs last year, but for Amaya. Now, echoing that over to Kyle Hendricks, I would assume that this is Kyle Hendricks last year with the Cubs. And if you could get the same production out of him as you did this year, that's awesome because he really did have a bounce back season after 2 injury riddled seasons in a row. And now, once again, you could kind of marinate those young starting pitchers like the Jordan Wicks of the world, like the potential of Ben Brown coming up, and who even knows if we go to Cade Horton. And you get one last year, Kyle Hendricks, to hopefully put up similar numbers that he did this year. And after that, say, thank you for all your time, unless he has an ERA title again, which I don't think that's in the tank anymore. But you get him for a year that you're trying to contend, and then you bring in the young starting pitchers.
One last thing before we wrap it up. Steele, not an NL Cy Young finalist. That was our hypothetical conversation like 7 times in like 7 different episodes towards the end of the season when we were just looking for something to talk about aside from how the team was playing. We were like, oh, but Steele's going to be a Cy Young finalist. I get he kind of had some bad starts towards the end. But that's something. That's in the news.
I knew he wasn't going to win it. We all knew Snell was going to win it, but you would have at least liked to see the honor, right? And I'm sorry, but Justin Steele was better than Zach Gallen and Logan Webb for good chunks of the season. I don't know how Steele didn't get it. There were a couple interesting calls and some tight races for second and third in the BWAA, I think that's what they call it, awards campaign. We all know who's going to win every single award, but it was more of who's going to come in second and third. A couple interesting decisions. I think Steele is one of the biggest robberies of them all. Have we also...
Steele did not steal. I thought there was a pun there.
Mikey, have we also touched on this as well? I don't know if it was announced last week, but 3 Gold Glovers as well. It definitely wasn't. It was announced on Sunday.
Oh, yeah, we haven't talked about that.
Yeah, no. 3 Gold Glovers. How about that?
Yeah. So excited for Nico. Had to shift positions after being basically a Gold Glove shortstop and had to switch into a second baseman. Really good team guy. That's a guy everyone wants, a glue guy of sorts. And he's I'm thrilled. He's going to be he is a Gold Glove second baseman now. We expected it from Dansby. I was a little confused by Ian. Ian had some interesting errors over the season, but hey, I'm not gonna get mad. I'm not gonna get mad at that. Whatever they think.
I know a lot of people are upset with the decision of Ian Happ, but as much as there were the couple errors, you can't forget about the web gems as well as the throwouts, or excuse me, putouts at home. I mean, you'll never forget that Milwaukee game where he threw out
twice in a game,
to win the game.
ISU legend Owen Miller.
Yeah.
ISU legend Owen Miller. I was listening to that one from my car in Wisconsin. So I was closer to Milwaukee, but it was still grainy because it was coming off the Willis Tower for the score. And it was grainy, but I could kind of hear it. And I was listening to that one, ISU legend Owen Miller and future Cubs coach Craig Counsell and future Brewers coach David Ross doing battle.
No, please no. Please no.
Doing battle in an extra innings thriller. Rossi's going to end up somewhere. That'd be pretty funny if it was a 1-for-1. I wouldn't want to have to play him all the time, though. That would just break my heart more.
Yeah, it'd be tough to see.
But things are looking up. And I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but we are going to be back with more next week. Another great interview coming your way. I'm sure we'll tag on another fun conversation afterwards. I'll give another hint. We like to hint at who the interviews are. It's someone who you maybe have bought something before at Wrigley Field. That's a good thing to look at. It kind of gives it away, but do with that what you will.
Yeah, leave it at that.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm Mikey Finelli for Ben Hootie. Go Cubs.